Welcome to Learn to Live Stress-Free. This is Christine Wright with Dr. Robert Wright, Jr., your go-to wellness coaches of www.stressfreenow.info. Our featured guest today is Chris Cade, speaking on solutions for overcoming fear and anxiety. Chris is a personal transformational teacher and creator of the Liberate Your Life 6-week Inner Critic Recovery Program. At 9, he began martial arts to defend himself from bullies. Before long, he fell in love with competition and quickly found success as a big fish in a little pond. Chris dreamed bigger, and at 16, he hired a 4-time world champion to train him. Chris now holds 2 second-degree black belts in Taekwondo, the U.S. National Championship title, and he placed 3rd at the Super Grands World Games in 1994. Chris has taught martial arts to students of all ages. In 2006, he was faced with seemingly insurmountable relationship challenges. He looked into spirituality and shortly thereafter attended a program where he delved deep into his consciousness and consequently became a spiritual student for life. Over the course of several years, he transformed, moment by moment, into the empowering teacher he is today. At the heart of Chris's teachings is his experience as a software tester. If he can't make something work for him, he won't teach it. His product management skills enable him to create resources that serve people worldwide. In addition to his professional experience, Chris has a wealth of life experience. Described as insightful, engaging, authentic, and inspiring, Chris is also a popular interview guest. Highlights include being interviewed in 2011 by New York Times best-selling author Janet Atwood on her Dialogues with the Masters series, in 2002 by Jennifer McLean of Healing with the Masters, and in 2010 he talked on screen with Hollywood movie producer Stephen Simon for Spiritual Cinema Circle, an inspirational film subscription service. Listeners, Bob and I are fascinated by the wealth of Chris's body of work, and we know that you will truly enjoy hearing what he has to share. Audience, welcome. Chris, we're happy to have you here. Thank you for being with us.
It's great to be here, Christine, and thanks for the wonderful introduction.
You're very welcome.
Yes, Chris, welcome, and thank you. Our audience is in for a treat today. Chris, I want to ask you this question. Can you briefly tell our audience what led you to do the work that you're currently doing?
Yeah, part of the bio that you shared is that I had these insurmountable relationship challenges. And, though I speak about it to some degree, I don't publicize it too much. But really what happened was prior to 2006, I had what I considered to be the ideal life. Great job, 6-figure corporate income in Silicon Valley, my own condo, large retirement accounts building up, great social life, just got married, a kid on the way. Basically, from my perspective, the pretty perfect life. I had no interest in self-awareness, interest in spirituality, no curiosity about even the nature of my thoughts. I just took myself to be, the life that I lived. And my wife at the time was into spirituality, and she was reading a lot and learning things. And over time, what became clear was that when there were challenges in the relationship, I didn't really have a very compassionate response. I would listen politely for a couple hours, or however long the conversation went, and then metaphorically, I'd just lift up the rug, sweep the issues under, drop it down, and pretend like nothing ever happened. And so over time, this way of dismissing issues built up, and it created friction in the relationship. And we were pretty much pulling apart to the point where my wife at the time knew what I really didn't know, which is if I don't shape up, it's not going to happen. The marriage is going to fall apart. And so at that point, she did actually threaten me and say, either get a spiritual path or get a divorce lawyer. And given that I had everything I thought I wanted in life, I really felt threatened by that. I had fear of failure, codependency issues, fear of rejection. All these things were underlying who I was, and I wasn't aware of it. This is looking back on who I was. And so I really looked at it as 2 options, because divorce wasn't an option to me. I didn't want to be a failure. I didn't want to be rejected unconsciously. Those weren't options, and that would be associated with divorce. So really, I only had two options. First was my impulse, which was to grab her and throw her through the window, and that's not a good plan. And I recognized that in the moment that my anger would not be the optimal response there. And so reluctantly, I went and checked out spirituality. And I went to the bookstore and looked at some random books. Basically, I was just skimming book titles to see what caught my attention. Then I opened a few different books to random pages to see what might resonate with me. So I was really just kind of in the flow, trusting what would happen. And one book that I opened to said, hey, this is an answer to my niece who asked me spirituality. What's in it for me? Why should I even care about spirituality? And that really struck a chord with me because I didn't care about spirituality, and I was only doing it because my hand was forced. But within the pages, what I found was a resonance where I had always had a fascination with metaphysical type topics. And so in this book, the author was talking about his experiences at the Monroe Institute and brainwave entrainment and consciousness and exploration into the nature of the cosmos, at least as I interpreted his experience in book. And so that really spoke to me, and I kept reading more and following sort of this path of reading a few books opening up a few books at a time and seeing which one called to me and reading that one. And eventually, after probably about 6 months after that experience of being faced with the threat of the divorce, I actually attended the Monroe Institute and went through their Gateway Voyage program. And from then on, it was just a path that I was deeply passionate about. One of the facilitators there was talking with me afterwards and said, Chris, you might want to check out the Diamond Approach. And, I followed her guidance, checked it out, and ended up being a student for 7 years. And so the Diamond Approach, the Monroe Institute, and other teachers have informed that path since then, a path where I value truth, curiosity, really understanding the nature of myself and why I'm here, why I think what I think, a complete 180 from who I was prior to 2006, where I cared about nothing about that, and I just wanted a bigger bank account so I could retire early. So that's the somewhat short version of how I went from having no interest at all in what we're talking about to being deeply passionate about serving and supporting others and bringing them fresh perspectives on how to step through the difficulties in life, just like I had faced.
Incredible. Thank you. There's nothing like the right motivation. So
True.
You certainly had it, and you really followed through. One of the things that I want to pick up following through on our topic is the fear. Fear is a great motivator. It will move you forward. And in one of your e-courses, you have so many, they're wonderful, you speak about the distinction between fear and anxiety. And you have that particular statement that strikes a chord with me, that action removes anxiety, but anxiety stops you from acting. So could you tell our audience a little bit about this distinction, for those who are not aware, between fear and anxiety, and how do you get to moving when you're afraid, when you have anxiety?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. And, at the end of the day, fear is just the base primal nervous system response that says fight, flight, or freeze. It says we're dealing with some situation that's threatening our survival. It could be physical survival, so a train, car, something is coming at us, or caveman times, a giant stick, a lion, bow and arrow. Any of that could be coming at us, and so there's a very physical, real response that if we don't deal with this right now, we will die. Our survival is directly threatened. There's also what ends up being conflated with that. As we get older, we are social creatures. And so fear then serves the purpose of, if we have a healthy dose of fear of caregivers or people around us, and I'm not talking about like people who intentionally scare us, but underneath, we still have that survival mechanism, and we're dependent on our parents or caregivers to survive. And so there's always going to be in a child some unconscious fear. It doesn't have to run their life, but it's going to be present on some level that says, if I don't listen to this person, my needs won't get met. And that goes deep down into the nervous system and translates to I will die. So as we get older, we have more relationships with peers, friends, romantic relationships and partners, and so on. And this still ends up being the emotional fear that we have, the fear of rejection. So in the case of a workplace, the fear of rejection, fear that we might get fired, which then keeps diving down into fear that I'll lose my home, fear that I'll starve, fear that I'll die. So when we really understand that fear is a survival mechanism designed to keep us alive physically, but that we also, being emotional creatures, then conflate that and direct it in that way as well towards emotions, we can start to see how clearing away what we're actually scared of, or what we think we're scared of, lets us see the real fear. So we think we're scared of being fired from work when really we're deep down it's a survival fear. Now, anxiety ends up being this space we put us in emotionally where we're not dealing with those fears. So if we're late to work or whatever it is, or the relationships that aren't working, in my case, the threat of divorce, what would have happened if I kept ignoring the threat of a divorce? I would have started feeling the anxiety of the moment, of not being able to deal with a situation, of feeling incapacitated, wilted. The physical body actually will start to kind of curl and drop or slouch when we're in that state of anxiety, when we feel we can't move forward with dealing with our fears. And it's a really tough place to be, especially when, if we're fortunate, we know what we're anxious about. And I say fortunate meaning that there's a lot of people in the world who experience anxiety without knowing why, without an object, without saying, I'm anxious of this situation. And that can feel harder to deal with because there's less concrete actions. But at the end of the day, all of our anxieties are pointing to fears that we haven't dealt with. They're pointing towards situations in our life or emotions that we've carried, either consciously or unconsciously, that haven't been addressed. And so when we can really understand that anxiety is basically this buildup of fear, then we can start to clear away and be curious, what am I anxious about? What am I feeling? What's here? Now, we may not get an answer. So the next step is to actually look at what types of either personal development or spiritual practices can start to clear away some of that. So meditation, it's been scientifically studied for centuries, more scientifically now that we have real measurement things to look at brain waves and EEGs and look at, how the brain actually changes through meditation. But it's been used for centuries to calm fear and anxiety. So we can use tools like meditation to start to clear away some of that anxiety. We can do other practices, deep breathing, breath work, EFT tapping. These are all modalities that we can use to start calming the nervous system from anxiety, whether we know what the anxious thing is we're pointing at or we don't know. Either way, it's going to start calming the nervous system. And from there, once that nervous system gets a little bit calmer, we can start to see what we're actually scared of. And when we see what we're scared of, we can take more concrete actions. So if we don't know what we're scared of, we need to do any action that will calm the nervous system. In my deepest moments of anxiety, what I found was sometimes I just needed a distraction. And in personal development and spiritual circles, there's often sort of a distancing away from the idea of distracting ourselves. The common wisdom is deal with your emotions, embrace them, dive into them. The truth is, though, when we are in the deepest states of anxiety and fear, the first thing we have to do is calm our nervous system, whatever it takes. And so I've been in this situation where I had to literally just watch movies just so that I wasn't thinking about the anxiety and fear constantly. And in those cases, I was watching movies that I felt supported the person I wanted to be. So they were people overcoming adversity, people showing kind of superhuman qualities, the things where I was thinking, like, what would it be if I wasn't identifying with fear? It would be these characters that I'm watching. These characters who have faith in God, whatever it was that I felt I needed. I was watching movies, so at least when I was distracting myself, I was still passively programming my brain to step out of the fear and the anxiety. So just to be really clear, the first step is always to calm the nervous system to the best of our abilities. And then when we can do that, we can start taking concrete actions to deal with whatever we're scared of. So in the case of a work situation, we're scared of getting fired. Well, we can either choose to step up more fully in our role. We can have conversations with our coworkers or our manager about what's needed to perform better. We can get feedback, because it may be that we're doing amazing in our job and we just don't have any feedback and no one tells us. So we might need to just get the praise that we need to feel secure in the job. It's a possibility we might need to start looking for a new job. So there's all these possibilities that someone could start taking action on once the fear or anxiety, the real grip of it, is loosened some. And it doesn't have to be gone. We can take action while being terribly frightened. That's what we had to do as primitives. A lion's coming at us. We're not going to sit here and focus on calming our nervous system. We're going to take care of what will help us survive first and foremost. So if there is an action we can take, we might as well take it. And at the same time, always focus on calming that nervous system, because that is where all the fear is running through. That's where all the stress hormones, cortisol, and things like that are running through our bodies and reinforcing fight or flight, fight or flight, fight or flight. Every 6 seconds, those chemicals course through our body while we're stressed, while we are fear, while we're in anxiety. So we usually have about 6 seconds to stop that cycle. And if we stop it by calming the nervous system, we stop more cortisol and other stress hormones from being flooded into the body. So we can actually stop the cycle of feeling fear and anxiety. But if we don't calm that nervous system, we could stay triggered for hours or even days. And all of that will just perpetuate more fear and anxiety, because we're getting chemicals on top of what we're feeling, on top of the experience. So I could probably go on for days, but that's more than enough meat there for now to play with.
Yes, Chris, I think it is a topic that you can go on for days about. And you mentioned some of the solutions to the fear, but I think sometimes, I know for myself and with the clients that I've worked with, when a person is caught up in that replaying their fears or exaggerating, or that, for those who would remember laughing, the sky is falling, whether the fear is real or imagined, when you get caught up with it and you're trying to say, oh, there is no pink elephant in the room, that in that moment, to be able to quiet your mind, that seems to be a habit that needs to be built, that you need to have that technique or tool at your disposal. You're so well trained in so many things, and I mean, certainly, you said you learn things over time, but when someone first meets this, how does one remember in the moment that I need to calm down, whether someone stupefies themselves, not as a solution the way you did in watching something to uplift you, but in either biting your fingernails or eating ice cream? What reminds you to calm yourself in the moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the first thing is recognizing that we need to practice when we're not in the moment. It's just like any athlete, when they get onto the basketball court or the golf course or wherever they're playing, they've practiced a lot, so that when they step into that game, a big part of what they're playing on is actually unconscious physical muscle memory. Their muscles know how to shoot a basketball. They don't have to think, okay, my arm goes up, my wrist flicks, my hips turn slightly to the right, and, but that's what they learn when they're in practice. Their coach is giving them that feedback constantly. Yeah. Do this, do that, do this, do that. But once the muscle memory is there, they're not thinking about it. They're just doing it. Going back to the intro you gave me, martial arts, I competed at the World Games in '94. And I had been practicing. It was choreographed forms to music, so it was very creative. For those who aren't familiar with musical forms or musical kata, it's very much like you would see Olympic ice skating. Very, it's about beauty, grace, execution, poise, difficulty, things like that. So here I am competing at the World Games, and I'm going through it, and at the end of my form, when I finished it, my coach comes up to me and says, "Did you forget your form? Did you mess up?" And I said, "Yeah, there was a part I actually just totally did the wrong thing." And nobody knew, because I didn't even know, except as it was happening, my muscle did something different than what I had previously choreographed. But because there was so much muscle memory, I still carried through and kept going as though nothing happened. Because muscle memory can do that when we have to practice. And that's similar to things like meditating daily. We meditate daily so we learn how to ground ourselves. We learn how to let go of the thoughts that are distracting us. We learn how to land in our body so that when we are faced with an uncertain situation that is causing us fear, whether it is being late for work or a deeper primal fear, I mean, we could list, books worth of all the things we can be scared about in the world. But when we're faced with any of those things, we don't have to think as much about, this would be a good time for me to meditate. If we can, that's what we need to do, right, is practice the deep breathing that comes with a lot of meditation practices. And I love meditation where we focus on the breath or on the belly, because the belly and the breath are both natural calming responses, where if we breathe deeply, it sends a message to the brain that we're okay. So then our brain stops creating the hormones that are causing our body to feel stressed, so we can start to calm down. So deep breathing is a great way to do it, and starting with a meditation every day gives us the foundation so that in any moment of the day, we can be reminding ourselves to breathe deeply. It doesn't just have to be when we're feeling stressed. We could just, be walking down the street and look at the sun and go, it's a good time just to take a deep breath, a few deep breaths. And if we keep remembering to the best of our abilities to take deep breaths, to calm our nervous system when we're not in a stressful or anxious or fearful situation, then when those situations come up, we're much more likely to remember that, to take a chance on giving it a try. Like, what's the worst going to happen if I take 3 deep breaths when I'm scared? Let's find out. So the first thing is really just practice it when you don't need it. Another thing that is very helpful for me is having Post-it notes around, having affirmations on my computer, things like that, where, again, the goal is not to remind me when I'm feeling fearful or anxious. It's to remind me all throughout the day, anytime, to return to the present moment, to return into a state of relaxation, to return into a state of breathing more fully, and really enjoying the present moment to the best of my abilities. Harder when I'm scared or anxious, easier when there's a beautiful sunset in front of me. But either way, the opportunity is the same. Just keep practicing when we don't need it. Remind ourselves to do the practice, just randomly throughout the day.
Right.
And use whatever reminders support us. I have my partner, I will ask her, to just randomly, periodically, just ask me, what I'm noticing in my body. Very simple question, because having someone else who will randomly keep me accountable for remembering to return to presence, remembering to take a deep breath, is an incredible support.
I love that. That is so beautiful, creating the habit in the moment and shoring this up when it's not a necessity.
Right.
Yeah, Chris, this is brilliant. I've been listening in here, and I want to jump in. One thing that I keyed in on in your response is that this notion of creating an automatic pilot, if you will, from the habit of practice. And that's something that many people wrestle with, how, like hitting the gym regularly, to develop not just consistency, but to be consistently consistent, to go to the gym 5 days a week and then alternate cross-training, and then the other 2 days maybe you either rest or you walk. And so I think that's something else that you said, which would reminded me of a book that I read years ago. It was titled Why Winners Win. And when you brought up the issue of the need to practice, because I was specifically thinking of clients that had experienced panic attacks, and that they have this capacity to catastrophize at a high level and ruminate at a high level, catastrophizing in the future and ruminating on things in the past that happened. But in this book, it was called Why Winners Win. I remember a story about Michael Jordan, and they asked him what he was thinking during the timeout before he was going to take the final shot. So this was Phil Jackson was the coach of the Chicago Bulls, and they asked Michael Jordan, so what state are you in of state of readiness so that you don't choke? Many people get into a pressure situation. They have to make that key foul shot, or there's 5 seconds left on the clock. So they asked Michael Jordan, with 5 seconds on the clock, coach calls a 20-second timeout. What are you thinking? And I think Michael Jordan's response is very eye-opening, because everyone knows he's at the championship level and that he's able to get it done. He said that during the timeout, what he's thinking about is chewing his gum. And I remember when I was reading that, I said, oh, that's very interesting. He said the whole key is being able to get out of his own way, because he was one of the first guys in that practice and the last guys on the floor. And so he was saying to let his body knows what to do. It's exactly what you were saying, Chris, that he has the muscle memory. And so the issue is to shut down his left hemisphere from overthinking, so that he could be in the zone of excellence, and then he gets the ball, and he just does the same thing he does in practice. So he's not hearing the crowd. And it made me also think of the interview I saw years ago with Tiger Woods, where they were saying when he was walking on, I remember one of the commentators saying, Tiger Woods is walking from the 17th to 18th hole, and he has to make this critical putt. And they were saying he had like a tunnel vision where he didn't even hear the crowd. He was like in a zone. So I think what you were saying that I think really resonated with me. So I wanted to ask you this. In terms of a panic attack and for the anxiety, I know you have many systems that can be helpful to people. So can you talk about what your unique approach is to helping people that would experience a panic attack? And what I was thinking of is that, because you mentioned there's a 6-second window, and I said, oh, that's very interesting that you would say that. You have that opportunity to stop the mind from just going off the rails. And so techniques like pressing an acupressure point or using aromatherapy or music therapy. So can you tell our audience exactly your unique approach to handling a panic attack?
Yeah, well, one thing I want to circle back to before I get to that real quick is I also want to point out that, with Michael Jordan, he was also cut from the high school basketball team.
Yes, I know.
Not good enough to make it on the high school basketball team.
not good enough.
Yeah, exactly. Not good enough. He just wasn't good enough. He didn't cut it literally.
Right. Chris, I want you to know I got cut from my high school team, and years later I saw the guy that took my spot. I remember the coach saying, "One of you two is going to make it," and I was the guy that got cut. Unfortunately, I just ended up getting cut.
Yeah, it really, I think, points to also what we're talking about, that it's not just about not giving up, but he kept practicing to the point where he could say it was more important to chew his gum than it was to think about making a basket. It was that automatic, and
right.
That's how much he practiced and had to overcome from the challenges he faced. So I just wanted to highlight that for listeners, because it's easy to look at someone like Michael Jordan and be like, well, yeah, he's always been amazing, and he's the best basketball player of all time. Of course he practices, but they don't always realize where he came from in his own experience. And that's not unlike someone who is having a panic attack or anxiety. They're in this state of extreme fear of being overtaken, controlled by their body and their brain. And they want to get to a state of peace. Jordan wanted to go from not being on the basketball team, not doing what he loved, of missing the shots, of not being good enough, to later on being the best player of all time. And so what do we do to go from, as you're pointing out, panic attack, anxiety, into peace? And obviously the the first thing always is having that foundation of practice, because without that, it's just infinitely harder to find any way to stop that 6-second cycle of, endorphins and hormones running through our body. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, what are the tools that we can do? For me personally, it's sensing my hands and legs, feeling my feet physically on the ground. It's taking the deep breath. Like the dropping into our body is the most important thing we can do when we're feeling any kind of anxiety or fear or panic attack. And, that's many reasons, one of which is because when we drop into the body, we actually start disassociating some from the mind. And the mind is what's creating that fear and anxiety and panic. So the more that we drop into the body, the less our mind has a handle on us. Our attention can't easily be split between the mind and the body. So we kind of have to choose. And if we're choosing to ground in the body, then that's naturally going to diffuse a significant part of that anxious energy. And so that's why, again, deep breath, sensing the belly, for me, feeling my feet on the ground, that's often a little bit easier. Recently, I came back from Scotland and went to a breathwork retreat. And one of the things that in my personal process, everyone who was there had different experiences and different, insights that came from their time on retreat. And for me, one of the big ones was how important it is to listen to my heartbeat. And I had never really paid a lot of attention to my heartbeat specifically. And I've just noticed since then and during that retreat that when I'm able to fully tune into my heartbeat, it's like a laser-guided tuning system. Like, I used to sense my hands and feet, take a deep breath, feel my belly, and I still do those things. And yet, tuning into the heartbeat seems to draw me even faster out of those spaces and out of any space of being disconnected from the moment, any fear or anxiety that may have come up, like missing my flights on the way back, or, a lot of, different things that were coming up for me. Not wanting to be stuck in an 11-hour flight from Heathrow to Los Angeles while in a middle seat on a full flight. I actually was feeling some low-level, I wouldn't call it fear, but there was some kind of discomfort, and maybe fear, anxiety at a low level of just, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to be comfortable. I'm not going to be able to sleep. I'm trying to adjust, all the different reasons. And what I was able to do, again, is tune into the heartbeat. And what I'm pointing to that's a larger picture here, and something that is so fundamental that if people get this, they will have the opportunity to overcome any fear, any anxiety, any panic that ever comes up in their life if they really get what I'm pointing at. And it's this. Find what's true for you. So I can talk about taking a deep breath, or feeling my heartbeat, or sensing my hands and feet on the ground, and those all work for me in different ways. But that's what I've had to discover through my life experience works for me, and works for many other people. But it took me how many years? 9 years to discover my heartbeat, right? I mean, that's not a short time period to discover something so powerful for me, but that's part of the journey I had to go on. If I had, gone through this experience 5-6 years ago, or even a couple of years ago, it might not have stuck. It might not have had the value. So part of this opportunity that we're giving listeners is to go on a journey to find out what works for them, what is true for them. So when they're having an anxiety attack, a panic attack, the first time they try taking a deep breath, it might not work for them. Maybe the next time they'll remember to sense their feet on the ground. Maybe that'll help. Maybe it won't. Maybe for someone else, it'll be as simple as putting their hand on a warm cup of tea, something that brings them out of their mind. So it could be any number of things, but fundamentally what we need to do is find the ways that we uniquely can sense our bodies and feel more at home in our bodies, because as soon as we land in the body, we disassociate from the mind some, disassociate from the fear, disassociate from the anxiety, and then stop those stress hormones from running through the body over and over and over again. So the larger picture here isn't so much for me to give a unique technique. I mean, I can talk about taking a deep breath, like I said, and repeat the things I've shared. We can talk about brainwave entrainment, which I love. Put on a pair of headphones and it'll control the brain right out of the bat from like the Monroe Institute and other technologies. So I think brainwave entrainment is amazingly powerful. And yet at the end of the day, it's about us finding out what works for us. And that means we have to be curious. We have to look for the truth and be in our lives, not just when we're scared, but in our lives, just like meditation or breathing or being in the present moment is a practice. It's also a practice to look for the truth, look for what's real for us uniquely. Because when we find that unique piece, that one thing that makes us ground, the one thing that takes us out of fear uniquely, we can start calling on that more and more frequently. And we can let other people ground us and anchor us. If I'm going through a panic attack, I can have my partner say, hey, are you remembering your heartbeat, Chris? Right? And I might still be in such anxiety that I want to flip her off or something for all I know. I might not be in a space where I can receive that feedback because we all can get triggered to that state. But what if instead of telling me something, the one thing she does is just put her hand on my heart? Right, a partner there just to put her hand on my heart when I'm feeling fear or anxiety. And there's people in this world who, when they go through a panic attack or anxiety, have other family members around them who care about them, who don't want them to be going through such a confusing, disorienting, seemingly endless experience of feeling out of control, in that state of fear, and might be willing to support people who are listening right now with something that connects them to the present moment, connects them to their body. So any support we can get externally, Post-it notes around the house, around the car, in front of the computer, on the mirror, those can be great things to remind us to breathe, be in the present moment, feel our feet on the ground, notice our heartbeat, whatever, listen to brainwave entrainment, meditate, any of those things. Enlisting support from other people, again, just invaluable when we can do that. And what this is pointing to is that it's still not about one technique or modality. I am a big fan of kind of like the shotgun approach. Just try everything and then put as much support in place so that when we're in those moments of anxiety, panic, feeling out of control, fear, we're not just relying on one technique. We're not just relying on, I hope I remember to breathe deeply. That's great, but it might not be there. What if we might have a Post-it note that reminds us to come back to breathe? What if we have a partner who might put, her hand on my heart? What if all these possibilities that can support us? So I really want to encourage listeners to look for the truth and look for what uniquely supports them. Try different things. Try EFT and tapping. Try aromatherapy. Try meditation. Just if someone suffers from deep anxiety and fear, try anything they can. And when they find something that works even a little bit, dive in deep. Find the best of the best. Study it. Experience it fully, because that may be the lifeline they're looking for their unique experience of anxiety or panic.
Well, Chris, I've been listening to you, and to be honest, listening to your response has put me into a meditative state. I believe I won't be the only one. The listeners will hopefully experience something similar, where your voice was very rhythmic, so there was almost a unity of left and right hemisphere, where I was experiencing whole brain synchrony, if you will, where I said, he's giving the logical left brain analysis, and then simultaneously, especially when you mention someone close to you that would be kind enough and thoughtful enough to touch your heart or touch an area where that could stop a panic attack, that, it's just visualizing what that might look like and how wonderful an act of kindness that would be, and how people would bond on very deep levels. And then the other piece was, as you've been talking throughout our entire call, I noticed that you have mentioned the word space quite often. And so space is something that's very dear to my heart. I'm a certified open focus trainer, and the concept of space, creating space, is one technique in open focus you use to dissolve pain, dissolve fear, dissolve anxiety, dissolve grief. And so that's part of what I was experiencing while you were speaking, that your answers were opening up, to use your word, an opportunities to experience space in these different modalities or protocols or methods. So whatever, and I like what you said, to use for a person to use whatever worked, and then even if it just works a little bit, to dive in or to fully immerse themselves more. So Chris, I want to thank you for your interview with us today. You are just a wonderful guy.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm grateful to be here and serve the listeners, and I appreciate your feedback on how you're experiencing things, because that, again, is just a mirror and reflection for what people can do when they're having anxiety and fear, because sometimes they need to look at the situation more candidly. They think they're a terrible employee because no one gives them praise, and they don't realize that they're highly valued. They're just in an environment that doesn't normally give praise or know how. So having, external feedback can actually be very valuable, for people to help us see the best qualities of ourselves. When people notice that we're in a calm state, when we are relaxed, when we're in the moment, that's something that can be noticed. And the more that we notice it, the more it gets reinforced. And so that way, the more it's reinforced when we are feeling anxious or fear, we're more likely to be open to the feedback and to returning to that state. So probably play a lot more with it, but I figure we have more adventures to dive into.
We definitely want to play more with it. Chris, would you tell our audience the best way that they could get in touch with you or work with you? What's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, they can either visit chriscade.com or do a Google search for my name. I've got, a few different websites, different social media profiles. And again, the same principle applies in my perspective is, if someone's curious about what they've listened to, go check out my website. I have plenty of free resources, free ebooks, e-courses like you mentioned, products, programs, blog posts, a lot of resources that people can just browse around and see what resonates with them. And if, something really resonates, then dive deeper. And if not, it's great you checked it out, and keep diving somewhere else to find what really resonates. Because, my truth, my experience is one perspective, and it may resonate with some people. And if I can be that jumping board, that sounding board where they go off to find what actually works for them, if nothing I teach works for them, at least if I've sent them somewhere else that does work for them, I feel like I've kind of done my job here. And, even just for a brief moment, that's what it's about.
Okay, excellent. So listeners, if you want to learn more about what Chris has to offer or connect with him, just go to his main website, www.chriscade.com, to check out what Chris has to offer. Chris, what final thoughts or key idea would you like our audience to take away from today's broadcast?
Two things. One is always look for the truth. I never did that prior to my divorce. I didn't care about it. It didn't matter to me. And as a consequence, I was going down a path that was going to lead me into a lot of pain, anxiety, probably panic attacks, probably a heart attack, climbing the corporate ladder and just wanting to save and slave myself to an early retirement. So look for the truth. Find out what really is true for you. Listen to podcasts, dive into resources. But at the end of the day, don't really believe anything I say. Test it, try it out, and see what's actually true. And the second piece is really figure out what that practice or practices are that bring you into your body. Because the second that you can drop from the mind, from the anxiety, from the panic into the body, again, it short-circuits that whole hormone cycle. All of the chemicals running through the body get short-circuited and start slowing down and ultimately stop. We can't actually have stress hormones running through our body at the same time that we are deep breathing. Our body and physiology aren't designed that way. So as long as we can just fully ground in the body, that is going to be the ultimate release from the fear and the anxiety that we're looking for. and use the truth to find out what technique or modality or reminder or support is needed for you to do that uniquely in your life.
Chris, I want to thank you for your kinesthetic application of such a high-level resource that benefits listeners. Your phrase to just drop into your body is excellent advice, since the type of relaxation response effect you describe is bidirectional and is an example of an automatic feedback loop between the mind and body. By that I mean it doesn't matter from which end of the equation you enter. For example, if you relax your body, your mind automatically relaxes, and if you relax your mind, your body automatically relaxes. So I hope that people listening in the audience will take your advice and begin to drop into their body whenever they're feeling fearful or anxious so they can begin to feel better right away. So thank you, Chris. And I want to thank our audience for listening, and I want to thank Chris again for being our featured guest. And audience, no matter where you're listening, in whatever time zone you're listening, you can start to feel better right away. We welcome and look forward to receiving your comments about the show. So please let us know if there are topics you'd like to see us cover or guests we've had in the past that you'd like us to invite back. Please contact us through our website with your feedback and suggestions. Remember, listeners, if you'd like to experience the same benefits our coaching clients get with us and learn how you can get control of your schedule, including easy ways to dissolve your chronic pain, stress, and anxiety, then give us a call at 954-900-2179. That's 954-900-2179. Mention that you heard our Stress Free Now podcast show, and your first session is absolutely free. Call today to schedule your appointment. For Christine Wright, this is Dr. Robert Wright of www.stressfreenow.info. Until next time, be safe and be well.